clean energy is one of the most affordable sources of new energy, so you're going to see it continue to grow in a state like Mississippi.
They're coming in like ants and just making their beds everywhere, and it has to be stopped.
This week, Hinds County debates plans for what could be the state's largest solar plant. We have questions for the company building it. Also, we are looking at the roots of gun violence and smart steps for getting ahead of the next homicide. And the lieutenant governor wants to tackle Mississippi's chronic absenteeism numbers. All that and more this Sunday on Mississippi Insight. I'm Byron Brown. Thanks for joining us for this July 7th edition of Insight. Mississippi is seeing something of a boom in solar power generation over the past 3 years. It's become cost competitive with fossil fuel in coal power generation. The latest solar project in Hinds County would create the largest solar farm in the state, but has run into fierce opposition from some residents on a variety of objections. We want to look in depth at the Soul City Solar Project. Brian O'Shea is the Director of Public Engagement for Apex Clean Energy. That's the Virginia-based company planning to build the plant in Hinds County. Mr. O'Shea, welcome to Mississippi Insight.
No, thanks for having me.
Brian, a Hinds County resident has filed suit to prevent Apex from building this new plant there. Have you faced this sort of local pushback in other communities?
I think anytime you have any kind of development in an area, there's going to be people who are supportive of it and people who are opposed to it and have concerns. So I think with any kind of development, not just renewables, that's not something that's new. But I think the good thing is about this whole process is we've been taking a lot of community feedback. We hosted our own public information meeting. We went through the public hearing process with Hinds County. And I think that whole process has made the project better. So I don't think as developers we should be afraid of concerns and questions. I think we should be able to address those concerns and ultimately have a better project at the end of the day.
Give us the elevator pitch on what Apex hopes to accomplish with Soul City Solar, and how big a plant would this be and how much power would it actually generate?
Yeah, so Soul City Solar is a 396 megawatt solar energy project along with an energy storage component. It would generate enough electricity to power up to 95,000 average Mississippi homes each year. And while it's generating that power, it's also going to be generating benefits for the community. That includes over $156 million in new tax revenue that benefits Hinds County as well as the Hinds County School District. That includes over 400 jobs during the construction process for local workers and contractors ranging from equipment operators to electricians to construction firms to local gravel pits and things like that to help build the project, as well as long-term operational jobs and a way for local farmers and landowners to diversify their income. And that new income can then also be reinvested back in the community. So from an economic development standpoint, it'll be one of the bigger economic projects to come into Hinds County in recent years. And from a statewide standpoint, this is Hinds County really helping take a leadership role in Mississippi's clean energy transition and clean energy development in the state, diversifying energy generation, like you said.
When it's storing that power, that energy, if you have a week worth of cloudy days, how long does it store energy?
So energy storage is typically a 4-hour battery, so you can store that energy, and we have a 70 megawatt energy storage component. So that's 4 hours of 70 megawatts of power that you can put on the grid.
There have been numerous complaints and concerns raised by plant opponents, and one is the safety of the various components of a typical solar plant, whether it's materials leaching from solar panels or worries about the batteries used to store electricity as it's waiting for market. What is your response to those particular pollution concerns, or are they even warranted?
Yeah, I mean, solar energy is one of the safest forms of electrical generation we have. Over 4 million Americans have solar panels on their roofs. So, that just tells you have 4 million Americans sleeping underneath solar panels every day. They're an incredibly safe technology. Like any kind of power generation, you have to operate these plants efficiently and safely. And that's what we have a long track record of doing. We're an independent power producer operating wind and solar facilities all over the country. And you have companies in Mississippi ranging from your utilities like Entergy and Mississippi Power and other independent power producers that are operating these projects safely all across the state today. So I don't really think that's a warranted concern compared to a lot of other sources of electrical generation. Solar is incredibly safe and incredibly healthy because it does not give off air pollution, emissions, or anything of that nature.
Yeah, other criticisms include the potential impact on the wildlife, the effect on local property values, and how all those solar panels would impact the countryside view in rural Hinds County. What do you say to those criticisms?
Well, I think one great thing about this site is it's incredibly well screened. So there's very limited visibility to the project. Few people will be able to see the project on an everyday basis because of existing timber and tree screening that exists along major routes there, like Raymond Bolton Road, Airplane Road, and other local roadways. In terms of wildlife, a lot of this is cropland or monoculture timberland that's going to be harvested in the next couple of years anyway. And so we're converting that land back to pasture, which is what most of it was before timber was planted. And through a diverse array of vegetation and ground cover, you're actually going to establish a new kind of habitat in that area that's going to support insects, birds, animals, and we're also incorporating wildlife corridors in the site so that you're not disrupting wildlife connectivity for hunters and other sportsmen in the area. They're still going to be able to enjoy wildlife, throughout rural Hinds County just like they are today.
Talk about how you're getting access to the land needed for this project. Is this private land, or are you purchasing from landowners directly, or leasing the land? What are you doing here?
Yeah, a lot of people have questions of whether solar projects take land away from farmers, and that couldn't be further from the truth. We're partners with farmers in using their land and diversifying their income. So we typically lease land from a private landowner, not too dissimilar from what people might be used to in the oil and gas industry or for wind energy. Leasing the land from the farmer, giving them an extra stream of income, paying an annual rent payment to that farmer. And that's a new source of income that they could use to buy new equipment, reinvest in the rest of their farm operation, make use of land that isn't quite as productive as other parts of their farm operation. And so that's one benefit of a project like this, is working with local landowners. They can actually reinvest that money into the local economy as well.
Remind us of the timetable for construction and for operations.
Yeah, our hope is to start construction next year, and we're already getting lots of inquiries from Hinds County construction firms and workers and people who are really interested in being part of a project like this. We just started a scholarship program with Hinds Community College for students that are looking to get into their electrical certificate programs and other STEM-oriented fields. So construction next year, it would probably be a 2-year construction process, with the project being operating and generating that clean power by the end of 2027.
Well, they'll also, we mentioned earlier, calls for a 1-year delay in construction. Are you at liberty to say just whether you find that to be a reasonable timetable?
I think oftentimes a call for delay is just an excuse to try to defeat a project or to get a project canceled. So from a legal standpoint, we don't really see any justification for delay. The project went through the local permitting process, and it was not the first solar project to go through this local process in Hinds County. Held a variety of public information meetings, public hearing, went over and above all the requirements in the Hinds County zoning ordinance, and we'll have to go through other permitting steps with the Mississippi Public Service Commission, with the Mississippi Department of Environmental Quality, through different federal regulations. So there's a lot of permitting hoops for a solar project to jump through. The local permit was the first step of that process, but we're confident we can get through those other steps, and looking forward to getting into construction next year and being one more new clean energy investment happening in Mississippi.
So you're pretty confident that there will be a solar farm in Hinds County?
Yeah, I think solar is coming to Hinds County and coming across the state because it's one of the most affordable sources of new electrical generation. We're seeing power demands go up, both in terms of just the power we're using every day for our phones and computers and lights and things of that nature, but also, industrial development is on the rise, data centers, things like that. There's a growing need for power. So there's going to be new sources of power coming online regardless of whether it's our project or not. And solar is one of the most cost-effective ways to do that. Mississippi also just got its first wind farm. Clean energy is, one of the most affordable sources of new energy. So you're going to see it continue to grow in a state like Mississippi.
Brian O'Shea, thank you for joining us.
No, thanks for having me.
After the break, is community intervention the solution for gun violence in Mississippi and beyond? Mississippi Insight continues in a moment. Violent crime rates in Mississippi have been trending downward in recent years following big upticks during the COVID-19 pandemic. But it may be hard to believe that for people who live in communities with the highest rates of deadly gun violence. Even with the declines, Mississippi's firearms mortality rates remain the highest in the nation at last report.
The advocacy group, Every Town for Gun Safety, used CDC data to compare gun violence by state. The latest available data from 2022 scores Mississippi as the state with the single worst rate of gun deaths in the nation. Almost 30 people out of 100,000 die from gunfire each year in Mississippi. The national average is less than half of that. Earlier research, Every Town, found that gun deaths were split fairly evenly between homicides and suicides, each around 47%. 3% of gun deaths were unintentional. About 1% were officer-involved shootings. Gun violence especially impacts Black Mississippians. They are 5 times more likely than white Mississippians to die by gun homicide. And in Mississippi and the nation as a whole, firearms are the leading cause of death among children and teens. More than motor vehicle incidents, more than cancer, more than suffocation, and more than poisoning.
We are focused on finding solutions here at 12 News. And to help us better understand the problem and find ways to address it, we are joined by Dr. Joseph Richardson. He's a professor of African American Studies, Medical Anthropology, and Epidemiology at the University of Maryland. And he's done some critical research into gun violence and its impact on our communities. Dr. Richardson, welcome to Mississippi Insight.
Thank you for having me.
Doctor, we've seen statistical declines in gun violence nationwide, but not all communities are enjoying that sort of decrease. Talk about how the rates have fluctuated in the last 5 years or so.
So as you mentioned, during the COVID epidemic, we saw significant increases in gun violence nationally, hitting a 30-year high in many U.S. cities. Fortunately, what we've seen over the past year, at least between 2022 and 2023, is a precipitous drop in homicides, firearm-related homicides across the country. In fact, we're seeing a record drop in terms of a one-year drop in homicides between 2022 and 2023. I would also say in many cities, even in 2024, we're still continuing to see a precipitous drop in cities across the country. And so, for example, cities like Boston, to date, there have been 4 homicides in that city this year. And Boston is relatively the size of Las Vegas, Portland, Oregon, or Atlanta, which and cities that have in Nashville that have significantly more homicides, even though they have similar populations in terms of size. And so we are seeing decreases in homicides across the country among many major cities, but there are also some cities which, even in 2023, we've seen upticks in homicides. And so, for example, the city where I conduct my work, Washington, D.C., in 2023, we had 274 homicides, and in 2022, we had 203. And so I know that Jackson, Mississippi, as well as other cities in the South, particularly Birmingham, Alabama, have experienced significant increases in gun violence as well. I think many cities are just trending back to their pre-COVID levels. And then there are others that are going far beyond that. And so in Baltimore, another city where I conduct my work, if based on our projections this year, Baltimore is expected to come under 200 homicides in 2024. We haven't seen those numbers since 1970. And so part of the reason why I think there's been such success in cities like Baltimore, Boston, as well as other cities in this country that have made significant investments in community violence intervention program initiatives. And those are investments in street outreach, which they train violence interrupters who are also credible messengers that are from those communities, that are trained to intervene in conflict and have the conflict mediation tools, and also are trained in cognitive behavioral therapy in order to treat gun violence as a disease. And then they are the agents who interrupt the transmission and contagion of that disease. And so what we have seen and will learn from our studies is that the investments are beginning to pay off. And the investments in CVI, community violence intervention, are not going to be immediate. So when we see investments that are happening, it takes at least a 3 to 5 year period for us to begin to see significant reductions. And we've seen that in studies that have been conducted in Baltimore, reductions of at least 30% in sites that have been up for at least 3 to 5 years. And so I believe that, combined with the emphasis now on intelligence-based policing, has led to these reductions.
Yeah, here in Jackson, we're seeing so many young people that are committing these crimes. Why do you think we're seeing so many young people in their teens, 14, 15, 16-year-olds?
There are a number of reasons. We're not making enough investment in youth development, and particularly in schools. And we also have a lot of young people now who are suffering from mental health crisis. We have an increased number of younger people who are now dying by suicide. And so this is also a persistent problem, not just in terms of firearm violence as we typically know it, but also using a firearm and dying by suicide for firearm-related injury. And so when we have kids that do not have the access to adequate mental health resources, we live in a society now where there's a ton of pressure on kids, particularly from social media. And we need to understand what's the impact between social media and gun violence for young people, because we know many of our young people now live both in a virtual world and a physical world. And I don't think they make much separation between their online life and then their life offline. And so we need to understand what's happening in that space, but also devoting much more attention to what are the structural factors that are contributing to more young people suffering from firearm injury. And in 2020, gun violence became the leading cause of death for children, but gun violence had been the leading cause of death for Black children for almost 2 decades.
Let's talk a little more about potential solutions. You've done a good deal of research on violence interruption programs. What do those look like on the street level, and how effective are they in deterring gun violence?
So the studies that have been conducted thus far have found, some studies have found a null effect, but then the studies that have recently been published, one by my colleague, Dr. Daniel Webster, has done an extensive number of studies on the impact of community violence intervention programs, found that in Baltimore, those programs that were established in Baltimore communities and have been up and running for 3 to 5 years were showing the most impact. And I just want to emphasize that the return on investment doesn't happen overnight. It hasn't happened overnight with policing, and it will not happen overnight with community violence intervention programs. And so we really need to take a long-term approach to when this return on investment will happen, and we're beginning to see the results from that. And so the significant investment by this current administration in community violence intervention programs needs to continue in order to see those returns of investment, where shootings are down in many communities by 30%.
Dr. Richardson, thank you for your time and your insight. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right, and we'll be right back. While Mississippi has seen recent gains in national education rankings, the state has seen a persistent issue in absences among students. The 12 News senior political correspondent Richard Lake spoke with Lieutenant Governor Delbert Hosemann about his hopes for curbing chronic absenteeism.
At 53.7%, Mississippi has the lowest labor force participation rate in the entire country. It's 9 points below the national average and cause for concern for some lawmakers.
Further decline in the number of people participating in the labor force could have a negative impact on our overall state economy.
If people are looking to come to Mississippi and they need labor, then we've got to figure this puzzle out.
Senator Daniel Sparks will chair the study group diving into this issue. One thing he'll be looking at is the underemployed workers of this state and how to utilize community colleges to give them opportunities for growth.
Underemployed could mean without skills or skills that are somewhat obsolete. If we're talking about upskilling, I think that they're going to be a huge part of that.
Legislation can come in many forms. It could be funding for more training to try to skill up those workers who may be unemployed or underemployed. It may come in the form of special projects to areas of the state.
This study group paints a different picture of Mississippi's economy as the state enjoys the lowest unemployment rate in its history in a year busy with economic development.
The reason we have a 3% roughly unemployment rate and a 53.7% workforce participation rate, those two don't marry up, is because there are tens of thousands of Mississippians not actively seeking work.
Richard Lake, 12 News.
If you have comments or questions about today's show or suggestions for an interview or segment, just drop us a line. Email our producers. The address is news@WJTV.com. Big thanks to Dr. Joseph Richardson and Brian O'Shea for joining us this week. We'll be back next weekend with more of the political and current affairs coverage that you demand. I'm Byron Brown from all of us here at 12 News. Make it a great weekend.